Hello and welcome to No Nonsense with Pamela Wall. And we're going to do something over the next couple of days, a couple of mini pods to really catch us all up on some issues that are out there. Censorship, the legislation to enable that, and some questionable media behavior. But we're going to start today on the whole question of food and strikes and agriculture. Why are Canadians in this country going hungry and spending less on food? Why are governments sacrificing our food producers, like canola producers, in trade wars with China? And now, yet another work stoppage, another strike, which is affecting the Port of Vancouver. And this leads to almost $1 billion a day of trade and activity that comes to a halt. So you can imagine what that means for our farmers, et cetera. So where do we go? We go to the food professor, to Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, researcher in food policy, head of the agri-food analytics lab at Dalhousie, but you see him everywhere. He's on every topic. And I've got about 20 more topics, so we're going to run through this. This strike on top of a very recent rail strike could really be devastating.
No, absolutely. I'm quite, first of all, Senator, thank you for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Always,
Uh,
every day. I'd have you on every day if I could.
Despite the chaos in Ottawa, I can
Yeah,
only imagine how
exactly.
chaotic things are right now for you in Ottawa. But
Pretty nutty.
obviously, we've seen a sequence of labor disputes over the last few weeks in Canada, and the most latest one affecting terminals in Vancouver, and I'm sure you can appreciate that that's really our portal into a major market in Asia. 52% of grains actually go through that terminal. But most importantly, the thing about terminals and ports is that when you actually have a labor stoppage, it affects both inbound and outbound business.
Right.
For inbound, retailers and manufacturers can front buy. So Walmart and Loblaws, and they can actually front buy, anticipating a labor stoppage. Farmers cannot front harvest when
Right.
they need trucks, they need trains when it's done. And that's why right now you can tell that grain farmers are feeling really the heat, the pain, and of course, in two ways. You have delays, and delays can actually impact the quality of grains. And yet again, the reputation of our country is at stake abroad.
Well, that is the other issue that we take a huge reputational hit as reliable trading partner with anybody. Of course, we have disputes with China and the US and everything else, but a series of these things just makes people think, I better find another source.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not done, Senator. There's another vote today going on in Montreal that could impact the port of Montreal, which is a major port. So on the west side of things, you have
Yeah.
railways, and we know what happened to railways a few weeks ago, and terminals and ports, critical points throughout the food supply chain. And on the east side, we have the beautiful St. Lawrence Seaway,
Right.
making things easier for our farmers down east. But now we could actually be impacted by a labor dispute. So it's not an easy time. We understand workers' rights are so important in Canada, and I think it's important to recognize that. But at the same time, food security is at stake whenever there's a labor dispute. So I think we need to have a broader conversation at some point and thinking how we should consider the food supply chain as an essential
Well,
service, which is
this is
exactly
the
what was recommended in 2022 in that Transport Canada report.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the question we've got to get to when we're talking about food security at home, but also our reliability as a trading partner to feed other parts of the world. If this doesn't qualify as essential service, I don't know what does, right? It's pretty obvious.
Absolutely. So, and I know that it makes some people nervous and uneasy when we talk about this, but I think it's time to talk about this
Yeah.
because I think we need to set some sort of equilibrium between workers' rights and food security, not only for us but internationally. I mean, Canada is the third largest wheat exporter in the world. A
Yeah.
lot of wheat is exiting Canada right now, and wheat is responsible for 20% of all calories consumed on Earth. It's a big
Yeah.
deal.
It's a very big deal. And when you talk about food security, I mean, I was stunned to read these numbers, which you put out through, uh, through the analytics lab all the time. But 9.4 million Canadians are experiencing
Food
food
insecurity.
insecurity. Like they feel they may not have either the ability or the wherewithal to actually meet their food needs of their family. That's stunning.
It's stunning. And so back in 2015, we had about 4.9 million Canadians were food insecure. We're almost at 10 million now today. What was real alarming, to be honest, Senator, is when I saw the Feed Ontario report suggesting that a million Ontarians actually went to a food bank in the last year, and a third of them actually had jobs.
Yeah.
We have a food insecurity crisis in Canada. It's just not normal to see so many people feel food insecure. While in
Yeah,
the US they had the same problem with food with interest rates and of course food prices. Food prices went up as much as here in Canada,
absolutely.
yet their food insecurity level is barely at 13%.
What's your number here? We're 70% higher, at least, than the Americans in terms of people
So yeah,
experiencing
Americans are
it.
at 12.9%, Canada's at 22.9%.
Wow.
Yeah, big,
So,
big difference. And I think we need to understand why
yeah, so
that difference exists.
that's my question. I mean, the higher food costs, is that what's bringing food consumption down, or people are just saying, well, my rent's gone up or my paycheck is holding
Well,
flat?
so this is, I think that's the key, Senator. So it's the cost of living. So when you raise rates in the US by 5%, it will hurt households, but
Yeah,
not as much as here in Canada because we have households in debt. Debt is really killing families in Canada. So when the Bank of Canada decided to raise rates, it affected debt, credit cards, mortgages,
right.
rents, car payments, everything. So really, we were suffocating households. While in the U.S., their margin of error, their pathway towards at 2% is much easier for America and the Federal Reserve than in Canada for the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada's path to a 2% inflation rate is very narrow,
Yeah,
very narrow.
yeah.
So that's really what happened.
So what is going through the mother and father's mind, I guess, at home, which is this is a fixed cost. We have to pay the rent. We have to make the car payments. We have to do that. So the only thing that's kind of a quote optional is, we'll just have less food in the house.
Well, they're buying less food. They're spending less on food. That we know because the data is telling us that doesn't mean that they're eating less, but they're spending
Right.
less for
They're
sure.
spending less.
So they're going to places where it's cheaper. They're trading down with brands, etc. The bottom, Senator, was May of 2024. So in May of this year, we bottomed out in terms of food expenditures per capita at $243 per Canadian. Now we're
Okay.
starting to actually go up. Since May, we're raising. But here's the other thing we've discovered: food service restaurants, it's booming. Per capita expenses are at a record high this year. So something's going on. My guess, Senator, is that some people are still doing quite well.
Yeah.
They're spending at the restaurant, but many millions of Canadians are being left behind right now. So you do have this division. So when people are talking about this divided
Right.
socio-economic space in Canada, I think it's true. The data is really suggesting that we have two Canadas, a rich Canada and a poor Canada, and the middle class is being just disseminated,
Yeah,
really.
just squeezed. And you're
Yeah.
not talking about just food expenditures going up at the fast food places. You're just saying people are going to restaurants and obviously those that can afford. Like it's at all parts of the chart.
The other theory is that it's so expensive to go to the grocery store. People
Yeah.
are saying, but might as well
Yeah.
order, might as well just call Uber Eats
Get a pizza and feed the
and
kids.
dine in sort of
Yeah.
thing. But my
Yeah.
guess is that there's a lot of that going on right now.
Yeah.
But there are still undeniably a lot of people really being impacted by food inflation.
So here's a figure that I have to get your thought on. So living standards measured by GDP, gross domestic product, per capita, lower than we saw way back in 2014.
Yep.
But how does immigration and the huge numbers that we've seen in the last year, because it's caused the housing problem and the healthcare problem and the education problem, does it distort those numbers because you're actually dividing the GDP by a larger number of people?
Well, I think I know where you want me to go on this one.
Okay, well, you just answer it for me.
GDP. So I think GDP is a good metric,
Yeah,
but the real metric you need to look at when it comes to immigration is GDP per capita.
right.
And our GDP per capita is sluggish. So if you compare, say, the US with Canada's GDP per capita, the differential is 53%. The record, the historical record was 56%. In what year? 2002, under Jean Chrétien. Okay, that's our record. We're at
Okay.
53%, and for this year, we're likely going to surpass that record, unfortunately. So things aren't looking good. So in other words, we're welcoming more people in Canada,
Yeah.
but it's not making Canada richer. It's actually making Canada poor.
Yeah. So not the intended outcome of people who are
Unfortunately not.
supposed to be.
We're not taking advantage of this momentum. It's
Right.
great to actually welcome new people, but we have to optimize resources. We have to optimize their skills, and we're
Yeah.
not doing that right now.
Couple other things I want to get to in our shorter time today. So Loblaw is starting to open kind of dollar store like stores to put food in cheap, because you can buy at the dollar store or Walmart. Are they just recognizing this as the market of all the things we've just been discussing that people need to spend less?
This is interesting. I actually had the pleasure to talk to Per Bank, the CEO of Loblaw, a few weeks ago about this new initiative.
Yeah,
He wanted to chat, so we chatted just one on
yeah.
one, him and I. He said something I've never heard before from a grocer. He said that we are no longer afraid to cannibalize ourselves.
Wow.
So, in other words, this grocer, this number one grocer in Canada, is not afraid to steal sales from another store it owns.
We
That's
we
something
we've yeah, we've seen it in the airline industry. That's what they do. They put the cheap carriers out,
that
but it's their
exact.
own it's their own
But
market.
in the grocery business,
Right.
Senator, grocers are territorial. You know, you got your store on this side of the track. I got my
Yeah.
store on this side of the track. You know, they're very territorial, and that's why competition has been hard to elevate.
Right.
Now, I think with these new no-name stores, we could see Loblaws becoming more aggressive. They have no choice because the disruptors are simply Dollarama and Giant Tiger. Let's say
Right. Right.
things as they are. That's really what's pushing Loblaw to move on this. And my guess, Senator, is that we could see more of these stores in Ontario and Quebec, even in the Atlantic here. I wouldn't be surprised because they're easy to set up. It's
And this
10,000.
is a step beyond no frills and that kind of stuff that we've seen where you just have a product line that is cheaper.
No fridges. You need maybe 10 FTEs max.
Ah,
It's 1,300 products. That's
right.
all. That's it. So
Yeah.
it's really simple. You can open up a store like in 2 weeks.
Right. If you don't have all those other needs, the
Yeah,
refrigeration and the transport.
yeah.
Okay. As we carry on here, checklist. Vice President Kamala Harris talking about price gouging. We've had price and wage controls in this country. We've seen the government try to intervene in the last several months over, wanting more competition. What do price controls do in this part of the market, in the food part of the market?
The price controls are dangerous. I mean, I've never believed in them. I think it's a false good idea. It's the outcome is always devastating for the consumer. And there is one good example in Canada. And I before I became an academic, I was a lobbyist for the independent food retailers in Quebec. And
Yeah.
my job, Senator, my job was to push dairy prices as high as possible retail because retail prices for fluid milk in Quebec are regulated. So
Yes.
every year we actually presented to judges, I guess, to people in the Ministry of Agriculture, our case to raise milk prices. And of course, you had the consumer represented by some poor non-for-profit. They had no money, no lawyers, they had no resources to make a case to bring down prices. They didn't have a chance. And so right now, Quebec is the only province where fluid milk is regulated. And where do we find the most expensive fluid milk in Canada? Quebec.
Yeah.
So be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. So again, all right. There's a piece of legislation coming from the House, a private member's bill actually, that has landed in the Senate, Bill
Nine
C-293.
three.
uh, Measures to regulate commercial practices to try and minimize pandemic risks. This is how it's being proposed. We're getting a ton of mail in here about this. What do you know and what do you think about this?
There's something I don't understand about this bill. What's the strategic intent here? I mean,
Yeah.
what's the spirit behind this bill? What are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to pick winners and losers? Is that what we're
Hmm.
trying to achieve? Is it about real risks or is it about perceptual risks? Is it about perhaps enticing Canadians to eat differently? I'm honestly, Senator, when I read the bill, and I
Yeah.
read the bill 2 days ago, I'm very, very confused. I have no idea what this bill is trying to accomplish, to be
We're
honest.
getting so many, comments from the public saying, "What are we trying to do here? Control, the pandemic responses when it comes to animals as well. Vaccines. That there's a lot of activity around on that too, and that would then, you could make a case to people they shouldn't be eating as much meat. They should be using other product. Like there's lots of questions that people have about this. So there's something going off in your brain as well.
I think the fact that it went through the House points to the fact that the House itself is currently a mess. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
not
no
paying
that
attention.
I don't see this any other way. To be honest, Senator, I'm quite concerned. I mean, we have a dysfunctional Parliament, so if Parliament falls and there's an election coming up, I don't think Canadians are going to lose, no matter what the outcome of the election is.
Yeah.
I do think that perhaps we need to do a Control Alt Delete on the House.
Okay, two more things. Yes, there's beer in corner stores in Ontario now, where it's been in Quebec and other places for a long time. But your studies and others show that Canadians are drinking less because we can't afford it or we're already depressed enough.
Well, I haven't thought of that one, but obviously prices are an issue. I mean, we don't need to drink in order to survive, so obviously a lot of people are cutting back. Taxes are going up, making products more expensive. I think there's that. Of course, there's cannabis. The younger generations do think
Yeah,
differently about alcohol, Senator. I think you know that,
yeah,
and also health concerns. I mean, a lot of
yeah,
people are concerned about their health. There's I'm not a medical doctor, but I do read some of the science behind the research on cancer and alcohol consumption, and it's becoming quite clear. There's a clear correlation between some chronic diseases and alcohol consumption. So I think people are quite concerned about that. So I think I mean I think it's a phenomenon we need to accept. What I'm troubled with, Senator, is when I hear liquor boards saying, you know what, we need to increase revenues because we need to look good before the electorate because we
right.
need to provide a hefty dividend to justify our jobs. So let's start selling more non-alcoholic beverages.
Yeah. And then they're doing that.
Do we need the government to
Yeah.
sell non-alcoholic beverages? Yeah.
Right. That's the flip side of beer in the corner store. Okay, so one I also read with interest that Tupperware is declaring bankruptcy. So I've got to assume that everybody's eating everything in their damn house, so there's no leftovers. They don't need the Tupperware. Is that it?
I honestly, I don't know. Have you been to a Tupperware party of late, Senator?
I haven't, but I have neighbors that sell it.
Really? But
Yep.
I think they just fashioned out. I mean, I
Yeah.
do believe that there's competition that came into the market that really
Yeah.
Tupperware wasn't ready for. And socializing marketing is not necessarily something that we see a whole lot anymore.
Yeah.
And so, because you have the internet, you have all sorts of ways to sell products, and frankly, Tupperware was also seen as a very expensive solution compared
Yeah.
to
Solution
when
to
the
a
other day I
problem.
was asking my daughter because we were finishing dinner and we did have leftovers. Say,
Yeah.
could you go and get some Tupperware for me, dear? And
Yeah.
she responded, "You mean Rubbermaid?"
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
why
they
they went
don't know,
bankrupt.
or the stuff you buy, as you say, at dollar store. Just
Yeah.
one final word before I let you go. So I was at a meeting today where we were discussing why farmers and food producers in this country are feeling beat upon, really. I mean, it's not just the carbon tax and the clean fuel standard and all of that. This issue with canola and the retaliation that the Chinese, I mean, our beef producers have been retaliated against for 3 years now, and now canola's in the window. Are you concerned about this in a major way, or do you think this is posturing?
This is the perfect case of a very urban centric government.
Yeah,
Thinking
you
about
got it.
EVs, jobs in Ontario, and apparently, supporting jobs, protecting jobs in Ontario is more important than climate change because basically China could provide Canadians with a much more affordable solutions to drive around
Right.
in an electric car. But I guess that's not that important. But knowing that eventually China would retaliate against our own farmers. They did that 5 years ago with the Huawei
Yep,
incidents,
exactly.
and they did it again. It was very predictable, and they knew that. Ottawa knew that, and unfortunately, of course, it is a probe. There hasn't been any sanctions yet.
Right.
But my guess is it is going to come. And frankly, Senator, I know other sectors are a little nervous right now, like the lobster industry, where I am. They're a
Yeah.
little bit nervous about what's going on with China. So again, um, the farming community is really at the disposal of Ottawa to negotiate anything to support a green economy. And there's nothing wrong with a green economy, but don't don't sacrifice you know your
Well, I mean,
future,
we're
your
the
food security.
largest, this is what we do. We produce food for ourselves and the world. And if we make that impossible, it's going to not only make the situation
And the
here.
symbolism is so powerful. Canola, Canada
Yeah,
oil. I mean, China. Have you been to China? I've been to
yeah,
China. They know how to hurt. It wasn't
yeah.
about economic hurt. It was about political symbolism. And if you don't pay attention to these things, you're going to pay. And that's why you end up in trouble with China and the US all the time. That's what
Yeah.
I'm seeing.
Amazing. Sylvain, great to talk to you. Thanks for running us through this, all these issues and bringing
Rapid
us up to
fire.
speed. Yeah, rapid fire. We just need to bring people up to date and all this stuff that's going on. Sylvain Charlebois, professor, researcher in food policy, but of course he is the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University and thinks thoughts about this industry before other people do, and we're grateful for it that you're on top of it. Great to see you.
Thank you, Senator.
Talk soon to the food professor and thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you again soon.